That song reminds us all of something that I did not learn when I first became a Christian. And that's just this whole thing that we call the Christian life is really a journey. It's not an end process. It's not that we've arrived and that's it. Just as God continues to work in our lives and to lead us and to guide us and to take us deeper. And it's those moments when we can go deeper that God can stir and do some stuff, but we always seem like bobbers to kind of pop back up to the surface, right? Kind of resist that getting pulled down. And I think God recognizes that. And I think God is okay with that. Because what he's after in your life, and what he's been after in my life, my whole life, is for me to get to the place where I would trust him. Without borders, without limits, without sort of edges to it all. And that's kind of what this series, we're in the middle of it, by the way. If you missed last week, go online and catch up. Pastor Ann preached last week, I'm this week, and Pastor Jason is next week. And we just thought it would be nice to, this summer, just to share our own stories, our own sort of faith journeys. We all come from a little bit different backgrounds and different places. And so that's where we're going to go today. I want to share my story with you. But before we go there, I want to invite you just to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Lord, you are doing something in each and every life that is in this room at this moment. Each and every life that is watching right now live online someplace around this world. You're even doing something in the life of everyone that is not even here today and will never be here today or tomorrow. It's about those stories. It's about what those stories look like without you and what those stories look like with you. But ultimately, it's always about trust. And I just want to stop and pray for that person right now who has struggled with trusting you, maybe for their whole life or maybe for the very first time in a very deep and meaningful way. And I would simply ask you, God, to stand up and show yourself real in their life. To stand up and be trustworthy. To stand up and be God for them at this moment. I pray that's true for our brothers and sisters in South Carolina. I pray that's true for the family of this murderer. And I even would pray it was true for this murderer today. That through this somehow he would change his life. They would find that you are a God worth trusting. And I pray for us as a nation that we would learn that lesson as well. That this foolishness of racial stuff that continues to happen would just be dissolved in the reality of you. So I ask today that somehow my story can help somebody in their story. And I ask you just to speak whatever you need to now in our lives. In your name, amen. Hey, here's something I have discovered. And if you have that outline, you may want to follow along. That is, everyone has a story, right? And if we sat around today, this afternoon, sharing our stories, we'd find a lot of different stories. No two stories are ever alike. Even if you have similar backgrounds, similar ways things have happened, there's always some differences. And it's kind of the neat thing about stories is that stories tell a lot about people. And so let me just tell you my story today. I was born in Stockton, California. Born and raised in Stockton, California. How many have ever heard of Stockton, California? Man, there's a lot of people that heard of Stockton, California. That's good news. I hope you heard of the good stuff in Stockton, not the bad stuff. You know, since the 80s, Stockton is ranked in like the top 5% of the U.S. for crime per capita, for deaths per capita. It can be a pretty rough rough place. But it was a great place growing up, about an hour and a half from the ocean, hour and a half from the mountains. And I was born into a family. I have an older brother, just two of us boys. My dad was a police officer for 29 years. My mom was a nurse for a long time, and then went into the insurance side of nursing, kind of approving, those people you call to get approval so that you can go get whatever the operation stuff that you're going. I wish I didn't have those people. And my mom was that for a lot of years. In fact, finally retired, I think, in the last about a year and a half ago. My mom is 84 right now, so finally retired. But hey, I thought I'd share some pictures. Here's my picture when I was a little boy. They're cute when they're little, aren't they? Yeah. And since it's Father's Day weekend, I thought I'd show you a picture of me when my dad, when we were, I was probably 4th, 5th grade here. This is me, bowling stud as I was. As you can see, I'm kind of the smallest in this picture, and I was always the smallest kid in my class for most of my life, up until my senior year in high school. Kind of shot up between junior and senior year. I'm running my family. My dad's was bigger than me. My dad's no longer with us. My brother's bigger than me. My dad looked like all of his cousins. They're all these big guys, and I was always the skinny runt, and I never kind of fit in. I think I got a picture here. Yeah, this is a picture from my brother's wedding. I'm the one with the long hair and the goofy look in the back, in the middle there. And then here's me at my wedding. So there's a wedding shot, so you can see all that. So let me tell you my story. Like I said, I was raised in and I would call kind of a typical American family. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't necessarily poor. Both my parents worked. I was kind of part of that first generation of latchkey, and we grew up what I would say sort of a normal life. I watched Leave It to Beaver and Andy Griffith, Mayberry, all that kind of stuff growing up. Gilligan's Island. And I was raised not to be anything. I wasn't raised in a Christian family. My parents had this interesting idea. I think it was kind of a 70s idea that they said, we're going to let our boys grow up and they can decide when they're older what they want to be. Which is not a great approach if you want them to be anything, because you're not giving them sort of any direction. But that was my parents' idea. And so they would take us to church occasionally. I remember just a couple of times they took us went to a Baptist church. I went and visited, we had some good Catholic friends. I went to church with them, I think at least twice. Had some other students in my class. I'd gone to church with different than them at different times. But the most consistent, even though when I say consistent, it wasn't like every week, it was just sporadically, occasionally, the church that I went to the most was a Seventh-day Adventist church, because my grandmother was a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And so my folks kind of said, hey, I think for my folks, it was a way to get rid of my brother and I for at least a few hours from a Friday night to a Saturday afternoon, and so that's what we did. So again, it wasn't regular. It was just occasionally we'd go over to my grandma's on Friday evening, and I could tell you stories that would take all afternoon about my grandmother. My grandmother was not the kind of person you would hold up as the most wonderful Christian in the world. She was kind of old school, and looking back, I understand my grandmother was pretty harsh on a lot of things, but that's how she made it. She was a divorced woman. In the late 40s, early 50s, and so you kind of had to be pretty strong back then, and that's what she was. She was pretty strong. My grandmother was the kind that my brother hated to go places with her. I loved to go places with my grandmother, because it was a show every time we went. We would go back in the 70s. They had this crazy thing that you could go into a department store, and you could find a TV that you liked, and they would give you that TV for 30 days, no charge, to try it out. Their idea, if I get it in your home, what are you going to do? You're going to keep it, right? Because you're going to like the TV. My grandmother decided, no, she was just going to have a free TV for as long as she could get it. So I remember going into Sears one day, and my dad was with us that day, and my dad knew the salesman and told the salesman, you don't want to wait on my mother, go find somebody else. And my dad said, come on, hey, it's a sale. So signed up for the TV, my grandmother took it home. 30 days later, she picks up the phone and calls Sears. It says, come and get your TV. And they said, well, ma'am, you need to bring it back. She says, I'm putting it on my front porch. I'm done. Remember going to Kmart, another TV, because this time they asked for her bank records. She said, I'm not giving you my bank records. What do you need my bank records for? This is free for 30 days. My grandmother would drive down the road, and you have 2 lanes going each way, and then you have a turning lane at the light, right? My grandmother would get in the turning lane, but not turn. Just keep going straight. People honking. My grandma, gives you a little picture of my grandma. That's kind of what. So we'd go over home. If it was winter, way to start a fire is you throw some gasoline on the logs, light the match, and whew, it was a joy. And we would go to church, and so my grandmother decided we needed suits if we were going to go to church, which that was always a fun experience. So I get the suit on, and any of you ever have these wonderful black dress-up shoes that were kind of plastic soles? Anybody remember those? My grandmother had these grates in her house. That was where her regular heating was, not the fireplace heating, but the regular heating. So I remember we would stand there, as we're trying to get warm on Sabbath morning, because it was just freezing, So we're standing there getting warm, and then of course, you had to pull up. And it was the first waffle shoes. I think I may have been the discoverer of waffle soles there, but. So that's kind of off and on. We went with my grandmother. It was my exposure, and I really don't remember much about church. But I do remember a couple of things. I do remember that when they had this thing they called the Lord's Supper or communion, it was a scary event. Because back then, they would take the kids away from everything, kind of take them to a room, they'd hear a story someplace, but you'd always walk past these doors the doors would open and close real quick, and the men went one way and the women went another way, and you weren't supposed to look, and so you kind of got there, and then when you got into the service, it was scary, and they talked about Jesus dying and this blood and stuff, and they brought by the juice and the bread, but you couldn't touch that. As a kid back then, no. They wouldn't, if you even reached out, they'd slap your hand. It was no. You don't get that kind of stuff here, So I just remember it was kind of a scary thing. And I don't remember a lot. Like I said, it was just sporadically. So we would go to church with my grandma in the morning. My father would come over, have lunch with us, and then we'd go home for Saturday afternoon, and life would go on. And that's pretty much regularly off and on up through probably when I was about 12, 13 years old. My brother got to be either 15 or 16 and got to be old enough to decide whether he wanted to still go to church. And my brother decided no, and one of the great things about being the younger sibling is oftentimes you get to latch on to what the older one does, right? So when he got to say no, I got to say no too. So from 12 or 13, that was the last time I was in a church. And if you would ask me if I was a kid, if I was a Christian, I remember another student probably when I was in 4th or 5th grade saying, "Oh, are you a Christian?" And I said yes, because in my little brain was the idea that if I believed Jesus was a real person, then I was a Christian. I believed in Jesus. That's what believing in Jesus meant. I believed he was a real person. So I was a Christian. And they would say, "Then what church do you go to?" I said, Seventh-day Adventist, because it was the only church that I had ever been to more than a couple of times. And so that was the church I went to, even though I wasn't a Christian and I didn't go to church. And so life kind of went on. I graduated high school, went off to college for a year. I decided my brother was a fireman. My dad was a cop. My mom was a nurse. I wanted to be a cop, but I was too small and didn't have the guts to do it. And so my brother was a fireman. I thought, hey, that's something to do. So I went for a year, took fire science at a community college, and then discovered you didn't have to have a degree to get a job there. You just had to pass the test. So I started taking tests. And I passed the written parts of the test, but it was the physical part of the test I could never do, because I was probably 130 pounds at this point. And you get about a 50-pound sack on your back, and you go up and down stairs a few times, or you go up to the top of a 100-foot ladder, carrying that, or they charge a hose. Charging a hose means they put the water in it but close the end off. And here's this 130-pound kid. I get this thing up, and it's taking me all over the place, and I'm going. And so I could never get past the physical part. But I'd quit school, went and worked in an auto parts store for a while, and then something kind of amazing happened to me. I'd moved out of my house as soon as I could, kind of got to out of high school into college. As soon as I could, I saved up enough money. I moved in with a roommate up in Lodi, which is the next town to the north from Stockton. And my roommate was a guy named Big John. Big John was about 6'5" and about 320. My brother at this stage was probably about 6'3" and about 240, 250. Had another roommate that was about 5'11" and about 230. They had me, 6'1" and 135 pounds, which was not good for me dealing with people, because I kind of had a mouth. But when you're surrounded by big guys, you can have all the mouth you want, right? Kevin, you understand what I'm saying? You can be mouthy because you got all the big guys around you. You just got to figure out when you can and when you can't do that kind of stuff. And so Big John and I were living together. He was working at a metal fabrication shop. But there were two jobs in Lodi, California that you really wanted to get into. You either wanted to get into General Mills, where they made all the cereal, or you wanted to get into Gary Meat Company, which was this big butcher factory. It was this big warehouse that they took the animal and made it into all the different little cuts of meat that people enjoyed. And so every day after work, John would go into work like at 6 and get off at 3. He would come home, shower, go out to Gary Meat Company, go out to the office, say, do you have a job today? And every day they would say, we're not hiring right now. Have you filled out a resume? He would say yes. And every day, faithful, he would go, go, go. We had a friend who worked at Gary Meat Company. And during this time, he went through a divorce. And we just kind of hung out together, you know. People going through that kind of stuff just need somebody around to kind of be with them. So I just was with him. I wasn't anything intentional. We just kind of hung out, did stuff together. And I was working 7 days a week at this auto parts store, and I was just getting burnt out. It was run by a gentleman whose father-in-law owned the business. He wanted to be a rancher, and so that's what he did. He came in at 10, you know, looked around the shop, said, I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm going to get some coffee. Went down a few stores down, had coffee for an hour, came back, hung around for about an hour, said, I'm going off to lunch. Went off to lunch for an hour, came back, hung around for about a half hour and said, hey, I'm going out to the ranch. And then he was off. And then he had two sons who were just knuckleheads. So me and this other guy basically ran the whole store. And we did it 7 days a week. I worked hard, but I was never going to advance much more than that. And one day, Doug, who was the guy who had gone through the divorce, came to me and said, hey, do you want a job at Gary Meat Company? Sure, because I was getting tired of my 7 days a week job, and I knew it was a good job. And so he said, okay. And the next day he tells me, he says, hey, go in Friday and go see this person at Gary Meat. So I told him at the auto parts store I was going to be late that day. Got up that morning, 9 o'clock, went into the office. Guy greeted me. He gave me some equipment. He showed me where our locker was and said, I'll see you Sunday night. Weirdest interview I ever had. Well, that was great because I was going to make really good money. I was going to make money that people raised families on as a single 20-year-old kid. Then I had to recognize that I had to go home and tell my roommate, Big John, all 6'5" of him. For the last 2 years, he was going every day after work to get a job at Gary Meat Company. And I had a job at Gary Meat Company. So he was actually pretty good about it. Actually, John ended up working there about a year later. So I began my journey as a butcher. I started off at the bottom, which is, you know, you're picking up halves of animals. I was a pork butcher, by the way, so we would get a truckload of half of a pig. Head chopped off, but everything else just slipped down the middle. And so we would go in the trucks, you'd slip this up, pull the hoof off a hook, carry it out, drop it on this big belt, and down the big, what I call big disassembly line, it would go. So the first thing they do, they cut the shoulder off, they cut the tail off, take them two different ways, and they'd go out two separate assembly lines. They would cut things off until there was finally nothing there. It would go down the line. Things were pulled off until there was nothing left at the end. And so you would work over, you would box stuff for an hour and a half, you would tie stuff for an hour and a half, and you did that until you got a chance to become one of the line butchers. And so I started on this saw, and I was, you know, cutting off the leg, making little pieces out of that. Then I transitioned up. My last job there was pulling the fat off of the shoulder. Kind of boring stuff to you, but it was a great job. And it was there that some things that happened in my life that really sort of changed the course of my life. In high school, I never dated much. In fact, I didn't date at all. I mean, I went out a couple of times, but nothing. I was just scared of girls. I was afraid of girls. What do you laugh for? They're kind of scary. And I was on the younger side. I was always on the younger side of my class. And when I started my senior year in high school, I was 16 years old at the start of my senior year. So I started college when I was 17. It wasn't because I was smart. It was just how my birthday fell, and my parents were able to kind of squeeze me in. And so anyways, hadn't dated much. And then I started to date a little bit. And then I met this girl. She became my girlfriend, and we started dating kind of, you know, hey, things were going pretty good. And I was a butcher at the time. I was making good money. So everything was kind of clicking. And had these guys at work that were Now you have to imagine, let's imagine there's this biggest disassembly line that's between us, all right? You're on that side of the line, I'm on this side of the line. And my job for this next hour and a half is to take it was the loin, which is where they get pork chops from. And let's say Sandra's cutting the pork chops, so she's sliding them off. She is then sliding them over we have to have somebody over here. A guy named Neil was over here, and he was trimming the fat off of it. He would slide it to me. I would pick it up, put it in this piece of paper, flip it there, roll it up, pull it in the box. I can still do it today, even though it's been 30-some years since I've done it. It just gets so ingrained. When you do something for over and over and over for an hour and a half a night for long periods of time, it's there. So, you begin to do these jobs without even thinking about it, so you want to talk about stuff. And I was glad to talk about things as long as it was one of three things. Anybody want to guess what those three things would be for a 20-year-old guy? Sports, girls, and cars. There we go. The big three, the trinity of a young man, right? Sports, girls, a car. I don't care what order, what you do. Pick one. Let's talk about that. And, all these guys are in there, and they're all telling stories and talking about stuff, and it just kind of goes and goes and goes. And so one night we're working, and there's a guy named Neil that's right over here, a guy named Rick who's on the other side of the line. He is working on the bacon part of the pig. And so they're going back and forth, and they get into this religious discussion, which, again, is not in my top three. In fact, it is not even in my top 10. And so they kind of get going, and Neil is talking about this thing called the Sabbath, and he said, Saturday's the Sabbath, and Rick is saying, Sunday's the Sabbath, and Saturday, Sunday, and they go on for a long, it seemed like forever. I'm sure it was only, 15, 20 minutes, but I had enough. Because I wanted to talk about, right, So I finally interjected into this, my great knowledge at this moment. I looked at Rick and I said, Rick, anybody who looks at this whole thing would know that Saturday is the Sabbath. To which, amazingly, Rick stopped talking, Neil stopped talking, and we got back to talking. I think we had sports. We went to sports because it was the next category up. But at the next break, Neil comes over and says, hey, he begins talking to me about, how do you know about the Sabbath and all this kind of stuff? And I tell him, well, I had my grandmother when I was a kid. That's what we did, but that's about all I really know. I don't really know much more than that about it. To which Neil begins to kind of, we begin to kind of talk about some stuff. And again, we're together at this one spot for an hour and a half every night. And I discovered that Neil is a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, but he had become a member through what used to be called this evangelistic series, where they, multiple nights they teach you about the Bible and about different beliefs from the Bible. And so he'd become a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, had gone to church for a little bit, was no longer going to church, but he was glad to share what knowledge he had during the time we were together as butchers. It's kind of this weird thing. He isn't attending, but he's glad to tell everybody what's right and what's wrong. And so, about the same time, we're kind of going along, and the girl's name was Jill, and Jill and I are going out. Everything's kind of going fine. We're having a good time. And then, lo and behold, one day, Jill tells me, I want to start going back to church. I miss being, my youth group was great, and I'd like to start going back to church. Now, for a 20-year-old guy, that church is not in your top 10, not of any kind of interest for me. I did the smartest thing that I thought at the moment. I said, okay, why don't we do this? Let's go to your church. We'll try your church one week, and then let's go to my church and try my church. Yeah, because I didn't have a church. It was just, I was a ploy to her to say, oh, no, that's too much hassle. That was my goal. It didn't quite work that way. She said, okay. To which I went, oh, well, I better figure out where the Adventist church here in town is, because I have no idea. So I talked to Neil. I said, hey, Neil, can you help me out here? Here's my plan. I told him my plan. I said, we're going to go to her church. We're going to go to my church. We're going to decide that it's too different. We can't do anything. We won't go to either church. I'm going to be thrilled. I'll be done with this. I just want to get it over with. So that's how my plan went. And so it was just a couple weeks later, we decided to go to her church. Jill was from a Methodist church. And so I got out this suit that I hadn't worn since I was about 13 years old. Still fit everywhere except on the length, because I had grown, but everything else fit. I remember it was Jerry will love this. It was a white, kind of a cream-colored suit with orange and green squares kind of stuff pattern. It was sharp. But it was short. It was really short. And so I remember the whole family's, Jill's whole family's going, so we go, we meet him there. I meet him there at the church. We go in, we sit down. Where do you want to sit? I want to sit close to the back, but they kind of sit, about halfway down. It's like, okay, so we sit down. I don't remember anything about the service except one thing. At the end of the service, they invited people row by row to come forward and take what they called communion. And the only thing I remember about communion was it was scary. And it was nothing to mess around with. And this is something about God and all this stuff, and it was just nothing to kind of take lightly. So they all went dutifully up. I said, no. I knew kind of what my life was like, and I knew it wasn't kind of like what they wanted it to be like, and so I just kind of said, no. So they went up, did their thing, got done. We got outside, took a deep breath, fresh air, got it made through that, went and had lunch, went home. I thought, okay, halfway there, so I told Neil, hey, I found out where the location was of the church, told Jill, okay, we're going to go. It was either the next Saturday or the one afterwards. Talked to my buddy Neil, who by now we've kind of got this friendship going on because we talked about girls and sports and cars and occasionally religion, but I put up with that because we were talking about the other stuff. And he had a brand new BMW, which was kind of sweet, so it was all kind of a good guy to hang around with. But so he says, okay, I'm going to meet you. We'll meet there at this time on this date. So I get directions. I know where it's at. I go pick Jill up. We show up at the church parking lot, and I wait for Neil, because Neil said he's going to meet us there, because I hate going someplace where I've never been before. Anybody else hate going someplace you've ever been before, Yeah, I like to go with somebody who knows what they're doing. Even though Neil hadn't been there in a long time, it just feels comfortable. So we sat in the parking lot for like 30 minutes, and Neil doesn't show up. Which for me was just messing up my whole plan. So I told Jill, hey, let's just go, let's leave. This is crazy. We'll do this. We'll do something else again. So we went down. There was a lake in Lodi that everybody kind of goes and hangs out. We went and hung out there the rest of the day. Sunday night when I got to work, I found Neil and I said, what are you doing to me? Where were you at? Oh, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. He had all some kind of excuse. So I said, okay, this next Saturday, be there because I need to get this plan over because I'm tired of it kind of hanging out there. I just want to get it done, right? So the next Saturday, go pick Jill up, park in the parking lot, wait for Neil. Neil doesn't show up. To which at this point I said, enough's enough. Grabbed Jill, I said, let's go in. Now, this is the first time I'd ever been in this church, and this was the biggest church I had ever been in. And have you ever been to the Fairmont Church in Lodi, California? I know, okay, I know Dave, yeah. You walk to the front of the church, and hardly anybody goes in the front. Everybody comes from the parking lot. But we went to the front because that's the front, right? We walk there, and it's this huge mammoth set of it looks like stone stairs. I mean, they just go up like to the heavens, And they're wide, and they go up, and so we would take all these steps. They're so long that they stop certain places to catch your breath, You get to the top, and you ever seen these huge wooden doors that some churches have? It's like you have two hands to open them up. So we get in, we walk into this lobby area, and there's all these people that I don't know, and they rush up to say, oh, are you visiting with us today? Yes, we are. Oh, and they say, oh, sign this registry. They put this little rose on it. Anybody ever had this rose put on you? That's the sign that you don't belong here. So they can look out and say, oh, yeah, there's one. So you put this rose on, so everybody knows you're a visitor. So we get in, we sit right towards the back. And as the son of a police officer, my dad would always, whenever we went in any restaurant, he always sat the farthest from the front door and always faced so he could see the front door, the cashier, all that kind of stuff. It was just part of his training. So I had learned from being around a police officer my whole life how to kind of check out a room. So as soon as we sat down, I made sure I was on the aisle, because those are the best seats in the house, right? You know how to get out of here quick, everything's good, right? I knew exactly, I quickly located all the nearest exits. I was ready. Okay. So I had this all figured out. So we sat. I don't again remember what the pastor talked about that day. The only thing I remember was when he got done, they said, today is communion. Oh, it gets better. Now remember, I've only seen communion in Adventist church a couple of times my whole life, and it's been a scary thing. But now I'm sitting there with my Methodist girlfriend, who their communion's a whole different kind of thing. And he says, we're going to divide up for this thing called foot washing. To which right away I go, how do I explain this? Because I'm not really sure what it is. And real nice, this young couple about our age comes back and says, would you guys like to go down the hall and participate with us? No, that's okay. We're fine. We're just going to sit here because the pastor said we could sit here. So we're just going to sit here. So I try to explain to Jill what this whole foot washing thing's about, even though I have no clue what it's about. I'm just making stuff up and just kind of saying this is what they do and this is why they do it. So they get back. They have they bring around the bread and the juice again. Jill gladly takes it. I'm passing again because, again, I know it's scary and I don't want to do something that's really going to get me in trouble. It's already bad enough trouble. So it goes done. We get done. They say amen. And I see the door over here, and it's the quickest exit out. So I grab Jill. We get to the door. We open the door. And on the other side of the door is not the outside, but a hallway. So quickly I notice there's another set of doors just a little bit down. And so I said, come on, I see the exit. This one I hope gets me outside. As soon as I get my hand on the door, I feel this hand on my shoulder. And it's this little lady who says, oh, it's so nice to have had you with us today. Would you like to stay for lunch? And she's very nice. And I'm like, no, that's fine, thanks, but no. So we get out of there, and I'm thinking in my mind, this takes care of it all. I've got it fixed because we've gone to her church, we've gone to my church, and now we're going to see it's just two different because it's 2 different days and 2 different all that kind of stuff. So we're just going to say, forget it all. Well, that was a great plan on the one side of things, in that I succeeded in making it clear that there was this huge difference between our religious backgrounds, for whatever mine was, right? The thing I wasn't counting on was that within about 4 or 5 months, Jill decided that I wasn't the guy for her. Yeah, thank you. Oh, it was a heartbreaking thing. I've been going out for a year and a half. We were pretty serious. I mean, I wasn't the best boyfriend, but I was an okay boyfriend. But it was kind of, it kind of hit me off guard. And so honestly, it threw me for a little bit of a spin. This was my first real serious girlfriend. And so I wasn't sure what to do. I was kind of lost. And I remember crying. I remember praying, which is kind of a weird experience when you're not sure about what all this stuff's about. But I remember thoughts going through my mind. And it wasn't because I'd hit rock bottom because of this relationship. It wasn't I hit rock bottom because of my drinking. It wasn't because I hit rock bottom because my job had fallen apart. I began to think these thoughts in my brain that were simply this. What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? I mean, why do we have to go through this kind of pain? What's the whole purpose of it? And those simple questions started me on this process of saying, okay, I probably ought to try to figure this out because I'm old now. I'm 20 years old, and at some point you got to figure this stuff out in life. And so I began this process. There was Neil kind of kept talking to me. He'd been giving me literature all this time, and he was giving me all this Revelation stuff on the book of Revelation with dragons and beasts and stuff, and I was giving it to Jill, so it probably didn't help the whole relationship there. And I was just kind of skimming it because it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I figured she was more religious than I was, so I was giving it to her. So Neil kind of kept talking to me, and we began to kind of have some conversation. And Neil was, through this process, began to get a little more interested in going back to church as well. And so we started this process of hanging out together. We were going to the discos back then. Anybody remember discos? Yeah, baby. Angel flights. Anybody had angel flights? Silk shirts, the big chains, the hair. Remember the shoes, the big heel shoes? And I went from like 6'2" to 6'6". They were huge. I had it all going on. It was all good. And so we would go Friday nights. We'd go to the disco, and Nell kept inviting me to go to church on Saturday. Finally, occasionally I kind of started going, and then we'd go back to disco on Saturday night, and then Sunday'd come. We worked Sunday through Thursday nights, and then Friday morning, and then just kind of followed that pattern. And over time, it was kind of funny because I saw Neil here about a year and a half ago, and it's funny how we sometimes forget parts of our story. And he was like, I forgot that. I don't remember doing that. But we were going to the discos, and I like certain kind of alcoholic drinks, and he did, but all of a sudden he switched from that stuff to started drinking wine, which was sort of from my perspective, sort of why would you drink that kind of stuff, you know? You got other stuff that I've perceived as better than that, you know? But he started, and then after a while I noticed he wasn't drinking wine anymore, he was drinking like 7-Up while we were there. And I'm like, that's kind of hard to get your groove on when you're drinking 7-Up, you know? So I just noticed this kind of change, and I started going to church more regularly, and then this family in church. We were kind of the only people between high school and 30 years old in this church. I mean, it was like everybody went off to college and nobody came back, and so, and even though I was a couple of years older than the kids that were in high school, it just seemed like a big 2 years. And so anybody that kind of was in that age bracket kind of began to hang out together, and we began going to these families. Again, on Friday nights, we started going over there, started going to the disco, and they were studying the Bible with us, and we would go back and forth, and they gave me some books, and I was reading them at work, and it just kind of was this process. I began to remember, and there were two things that stood in my mind that were, one that was a significant thing for me in the process, another one that was a significant, I thought I had another out because I still wasn't so sure about this Christianity thing. And the significant thing was, I remember going to a party on a Friday night. I didn't go to the Bible study that night, and I got hammered. I remember driving home and just trying to keep the lines in the street in the middle of my car. Very dumb thing to do. But I remember getting home, feeling really bad about it because I knew it was not the healthiest thing in my life. And I remember getting up the next morning and going to church with the worst hangover that I ever remember having. I mean, I felt like this contact of dirt, all right? I mean, I just felt bad. And there was nothing I got out of the service. My head was pounding. I think I looked like I was probably praying the whole service because I just couldn't open my eyes. But for me, it was a step of needing to be someplace, of making a choice and a decision to put myself in some place. And I just watched, and over the course of time, I just quit doing some things, not because somebody said you need to quit doing that, it just sort of happened. And another significant moment for me was when I'd been studying, and they'd given me this book called Desire of Ages, which is this book sort of on the life of Jesus, kind of puts all the gospel stories together. And so I'd been reading through that, and I'd read this section. I remember it was midweek one day. Every break I'd go and eat my lunch or eat a snack and read a little bit. And I read something, and then I remember closing it with a big smile on my face, and I thought, I got him here. Because the lady that had written this book had written something about that when Jesus died, this earthquake happened in Jerusalem, and a bunch of people came back to life. And I thought, I'd never heard people coming back to life when Jesus died. This is crazy. But I thought, hey, if she wrote this and it's not in the Bible, this is my out because I don't got to believe this stuff. So remember, it was like a Tuesday or Wednesday. So I closed up that book. I didn't read anymore that week. Got to Friday night, went to the Deming's house. And Mr. Deming was this 65-year-old little bitty guy who had never earned more than minimum wage his whole life, had put his two daughters through Christian education all the way through college. He had lost part of his hand in an accident at work. He had messed up one of his eyes. He was sort of the antithesis of what this 20-year-old kid and this 65-year-old guy who was nothing in common. But he was this great, generous, patient guy. And so that night we kind of got through our study. How was the week going? Blah, blah, blah. And I remember at some point saying, I have a question, Mr. Deming. I read something this week, and I thought I had him. And I thought, this is nowhere in the Bible. I would have heard this from my grandmother if this was true. So, as soon as I said that, I remember Mr. Deming was sitting in his chair, reached over, he pulled his Bible out, he flipped the pages, and he read it to me. And I was, on the one hand, I was just crushed because I thought, here was my greatest opportunity to get out of this whole religious thing. And he squashed it by saying, no, was true. And which again kind of kept me in that whole thing. And so sometime during that summer, we were at a Christian concert by a group called the Heritage Singers. Familiar with Heritage Singers? Everybody laughs. They've been around for 50 years, I think. They were cutting edge then. I'm not so much now, but they were, a great thing. And they had some music, and they had this testimonial. And I remember sitting there, and I come to find out later, my friends who were part of this church were really praying for me. And I remember they made this call for people that wanted to take that step and give their lives to Jesus to come forward. And my buddy Neil was sitting next to me, and he said, hey, if you want to go forward, I'll go forward with you. To which I said, no, if I want to do this, I'm going to do it myself. I don't, it's either I got to do it or not. And I literally remember feeling this hand sort of holding me in my chair. And as soon as I kind of popped up, that was it. And that was the night I gave my life to Jesus. Yeah. And I told you when we started this that, I wasn't taught early on. I kind of thought that was the end of the process. Give my life to Jesus and everything's going to be great and wonderful. But then I learned it was a process. And there's never an ending point, and it's because God's never finished with us. And if we ever got to an ending point, we would say, I'm done. And God never wants us to feel like I'm done with anything. Because there's always room. There's always room for more stuff. So became this Christian, still had some things to work out in my life. Kind of began to work that out. Some point, again, nobody say anything. At some point I recognized that being a pork butcher was not probably a lifelong career path for a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. If you didn't laugh right now, you're not really clear on what that is, see me later and I'll explain all the details of why that's true. So I began to think I need to go back to college. I remember Jill's parents had talked about that, and they were probably smart in that. So I thought, okay, what should I do? And the thought quickly went into my mind and went out of it, the idea I ought to become a pastor. But I was smart enough at that moment to say, every guy I had met between the ages of like 20 and 35 who had become a Seventh-day Adventist sort of had this feel like they ought to go be a preacher. So I just took it as sort of this generic thing that if people are excited about it, that's what the thing was. So I remember thinking about that and kind of thinking, no. So I began to look at going back into physical therapy. Thought about advertising. My first thought was to go and be a high school basketball coach, and then I thought about that, and I thought, see, my games as a high school student was Tuesday night and Friday nights. Again, probably not a great career path for an Adventist. So I kind of said, okay, I can't do that, and so I kind of was narrowing it down. And then I got this idea. Actually, there are two thoughts that entered my mind. One was, I remember, again, about 20, 21 years old now. I remember thinking, I feel like maybe I ought to think about becoming a pastor. And I remember this distinct thought went through my brain. I thought, I would hate to get old, like be 35 years old. Honest, that's what I thought. Get old, like 35 years old, and look back at my long life and feel like I had let God down, that I hadn't done what He wanted me to do. And I also had sort of a more basic rationale for it. I thought, pastors get paid to do what every Christian ought to be doing anyways. Not to be sharing your face, so why not do what I'm supposed to do and get paid for it? It kind of made sense. So I actually made this deal with God. I said, okay, God, I'm going to go, I'll finish. I went back to school, and I'd never been a good student. I was never that interested in studying, and I never felt like I was very bright to pull stuff off. But I went back to school, and I worked, I went part-time at the meat factory, worked from 8 o'clock at night to 2 o'clock in the morning, drove home, got up and went to school. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I went to school from 8:30 to 3:30 straight with no lunch break. And I went Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think I had like a 9:30 class and a 1:30 class. And I did that for a whole year because I wanted to get done as quick as possible. So I went back, got the best GPA I'd ever gotten, and made this deal with God. I'll go to Adventist college. When I get done, if I get a job as a pastor, then that's what I'm supposed to do. If I don't get a job, I've done my part, And so my last year, I was kind of planning about what some other things I might do. Graduated, got actually a weird aberration that year. Got more. You could have more than one job opportunities. Got a bunch of job opportunities. So that's how I got here. Here's the thing I want you to know. Sometimes we think about these stories, and the reality is, we hear stories, And sometimes we hear, these amazing ones like Paul, that gets swept off his feet, or these people, these celebrities that had it all and lost it all and they become Christians. And sometimes those of you that have grown up in sort of Christian surroundings feel like, I don't have a story. But here's the thing I want you to know. Your story doesn't suck. Now, you're surprised I said the word suck in church, aren't you? But it's the best word to convey what I want to convey. Your story doesn't suck. Even if it's not this great thing of a life of drugs and alcohol and booze and women and guns and, or sports, whatever they're, at the top of my field. It's just different. Your story is just different. But here's the more important thing. It's your story. It is your story of how God has worked in your life. And one of the worst things we can do is think that everybody works in God the same way He works in our life. Or to think, I don't have anything to share. I've always been raised with Christian parents and Christian surroundings. Romans 3 tells us something very important. It says simply this. God makes people right with Himself through their faith in Jesus Christ. That's how God makes us right. Not through the stuff we do, not how good or bad our backgrounds have been. This is true for all, which is a pretty inclusive statement, right? Everybody. This is true for all who believe in Christ because all people are the same. There is no distinction. There's no difference between Jews and Gentiles. No difference between Seventh-day Adventists and other Christians. No difference between Christians and non-Christians. No difference between blacks and whites. There is no difference. We're all saved the exact same way. We're all in the exact same boat. And that's Paul's point. Doesn't matter if you got a great Christian background or a terrible Christian background or no Christian background or some other kind of background. We're all the same before God. Everyone. Raise your hand if you're an everyone. You're an everyone, by the way. You can raise it. Everyone has sinned. All of us. I don't care how good your background is. And I don't care how bad your background is. All of us have sinned. Everyone has sinned and has fallen short. That is that we're not worthy of God's glorious standard. We're all in the same boat. Nobody has gotten there. It doesn't matter, again, how good or bad your background is. And all of us need to be made right with God, that is justified as a free gift by His grace, by being set free from sin through Jesus Christ or in Jesus Christ, whichever way you want to translate it. See, we are all the same. And your story matters. Because your story is part of God's story. The reason I shared my story today, Ann shared hers last week, and Jason will share his next week, is not to say, look at us. It's just simply for you to understand us a little better. And for you to get a picture that God works in lots of different ways. For lots of different reasons. See, for some of us sitting in this room today, we wish we could forget our past because of how bad it was, because of stuff that we still carry around from it. Some of us wish we could kind of change our past because there isn't any sort of great moments. It's sort of like we kind of think, well, I've always sort of been a Christian. I don't have that big thing. I don't have that big terrible thing. But here's what I want you to know this morning. God does not want you to forget your past. God wants to redeem your past. And the best way He redeems it is for us to know our story matters, that our stories don't suck, that our stories tell our story with God and tell His story with us and with others. See, here's the reality. God's grace is always amazing. And I don't care whether He's gotten you out of a gutter, got you off the front of a magazine, got you out of a high position someplace. I don't care if He's got you out of a low position someplace. If He's got you out of a situation where life was terrible, had you find yourself at the bottom. I don't care if you've come from a beautiful, wonderful Christian family or from the worst family possible. God's grace is always amazing, and here's why. There was no other kind, right? My encouragement to you is to let God's amazing grace become your story. To see his grace as amazing in your life. Even though you say it's nothing amazing about it. Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing that all of us, no matter our background, no matter our privileges, no matter our opportunities, are saved the exact same way. To what Jesus has done and continues to do for us. With that said, there was a card that you find in your program today. I hope you'll take that out. There's a place to write down some comments or prayer requests for the staff. Every Tuesday we pray over those things.